Happy Father's Day. I'm joined by my father, Morton Halperin, who is working on his memoirs now and writing, amongst other things, about Daniel Ellsberg. Dad, happy Father's Day.
Thank you.
You can wish me happy Father's Day too, if you wish.
Happy Father's Day to you.
Thank you. So I've read all the obituaries of Dan Ellsberg and didn't see your name in them, but I know from growing up and from talking to you about it over the years that you had a long relationship with him that included three things that are pretty big historical. One, he worked with you for you in the government, including working on the Pentagon Papers. Two, it was your copy of the Pentagon Papers that you had put at the Rain Corporation in Santa Monica that he gave to the New York Times. And three, when he was indicted by the federal government on trial in California, you helped organize and run the legal defense team up until the moment the case was dismissed. All those true, right?
All those are true. And in fact, the case was dismissed because the judge was told about the wiretap of our home phone in which Ellsberg was overheard and that the files were missing and maybe had disappeared completely.
The files of
the wiretap. So that there was no way to tell whether the government had heard something on the wiretap of our home phone that they used at the trial.
So they illegally wiretapped our home, heard the conversations, and then said, well, we're not really even sure where the transcripts are.
They said they're not, affirmatively said they were missing from the Justice Department.
Right. But then they were eventually found, right?
Well, it turned out the Nixon administration had spirited them out of the Justice Department when the people in the Justice Department left and put them in the Ehrlichman's files in the White House, who was the domestic policy advisor of Nixon. And Ehrlichman had just been fired. So when they checked around, does anybody know where the papers were? They only asked current government employees. As soon as it appeared in the press, Ehrlichman told the FBI that he had the file in his safe and they were still in his safe.
So you played a pretty direct role, both in the action he did was your set of the papers that he gave to the New York Times, and then a critical role in helping him defend himself when he was indicted, and then indirectly a pretty big role in the case getting dismissed. All true, right?
All true.
So you knew him well, and I knew him a little bit as a kid. But just talk about what kind of person he was. Again, obits don't generally capture that; they're more, factual. But what kind of guy was he in terms of his personality, in terms of how he interacted with you?
Well, he had two personalities. One, when he was reacting informally, particularly with little kids, he was a magician and a very good magician and loved to do magic tricks. And so whenever he would visit us or visit me and you guys were over, he would do magic tricks and had new ones each time and was eager to show them off. He was also endlessly curious about them, and particularly technology. I was, as you know, a big technology nut. And Dan was always amazed. I remember him once saying, "Could I get a BlackBerry? What is a BlackBerry? How does a BlackBerry work?"
Yeah, like once we went to Baskin Robbins with him, and he had a similar set of questions about how to order at Baskin Robbins, which has stayed with me. So in terms of the first magic, just to tie that up, do you remember any of the tricks? Like, was he like doing card tricks or making like balloons disappear? What did he do?
All of those things, I think.
Yeah,
it's the usual setting.
I remember he kind of reminded me, and since you know almost nothing about pop culture, this reference may be lost on you, but he seemed kind of like Gene Wilder in Willy Wonka. He seemed like with kids, just like very like a gleam in his eye and like really excited. And I remember when he did tricks for us and we were wowed by them, he lit up.
And then the other side of him, he was very serious and could get very angry about people not taking nuclear winter seriously or not taking lying about the Vietnam War seriously.
You've known a lot of very smart people in your career, in your life. My sense is he was a genius. Is that right or overstating it?
He was about as smart as anyone I knew.
Yeah, that's my sense also. Just to tie up the history of it, how did you end up helping him with his legal team? You're not a lawyer, so how did you get involved in doing that?
Leonard Boudin, who was his chief lawyer, came to see me. I was actually home recuperating from a gallbladder operation. And he came to see me and said they needed help on the factual issue in the case, which is whether the material in the documents could harm the national defense if it was released. Exactly the issue that's now one of the issues in the Trump case. And that the government had to prove that there would be harm from disclosure of the information. And they were trying to preempt that by proving that what seemed like something very serious and very sensitive, in fact, had been made public in some other form before the time that the Pentagon Papers were released. And so he asked me to organize a research project, which I did for that material.
And just to be clear, that was an area of expertise you had completely unrelated to the fact that you knew Ellsberg, that there were your documents, that you were involved, otherwise, right? You were an expert in that area.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
So it's a
have
weird coincidence.
PhD, as you know, in political science. And I never knew whether Boudin came to me because of my expertise and reputation or because he knew I knew Ellsberg. It certainly didn't come through Ellsberg. He just called.
Interesting. So again, not just you have a PhD in political science, but one of the areas you've specialized in is the balance between national security and civil liberties. And so that would obviously have been the central question of the research project.
Well, I was just getting started in that. In fact, this was one of the first things I did in that area. So I was not then known for that connection.
So why did he approach you?
Because they wanted somebody who knew about the Vietnam War.
I see. And did you all think there was some chance, if the case hadn't been thrown out, was there some chance Ellsberg would have been convicted?
No, we were all confident that, well, partly depended on how the judge judged the jury, and he was about to tell us what he was going to say the government had to prove and how they had to prove it and what weight to give to the witnesses. Because I went on after I did the research, he then asked me to find witnesses who would use the research to testify. And I recruited a number of former government officials, a number of research people, and prepared them for the testimony, and then was at the trial when they testified and helped to prepare them to testify.
If he'd been convicted, obviously it would have been a huge deal.
Right.
So, let me ask this, did he testify? I can't remember. Did he testify in his own behalf?
He did.
So that must have been pretty controversial, no?
Yeah. I had by then left and gone back to work in Washington at the Brookings Institution. Ellsberg, I think, was determined to testify. And the compromise was that Charlie Neston, who was the junior lawyer, Harvard law professor, would cross-examine him rather than Boudin, who we were less confident would stay on script.
Well, not cross-examine him, right? That would have been direct because he was defense. Yeah.
Yes.
Was he afraid of being convicted?
I think Ellsberg was worried to the end that he might be convicted, although we were pretty confident by the last few weeks that he would not be.
And was it covered like a lot on like TV news? Was it like a trial of the century type thing or not really?
Yeah, there were a bunch of reporters there covering the trial every day. The LA Times did particular coverage because it was in Los Angeles, but the Times had a reporter there. Post had a reporter there. And one of the highlights for me of the trial was when I testified. The day I testified, the reporters all came to me to tell me that the prosecutor, who was named Nissen, as opposed to Charlie Nesson, had called them all in and told them that the government believed that I was a mastermind behind Ellsberg's release of the Pentagon Papers, and that they really wanted to indict me. They just didn't have the evidence to do so. And I, on the record, denied that, had no truth.
Do you remember what year you met him?
I met him in 1961.
61. So, and you were friends through his passing, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So tell us about your most recent conversation with him before he died.
So he called me. He called a small number of people personally to tell me that he was about to put out that statement. And then I got a call from a family member telling me that he was no longer going to do talks or conversations. But between those two things, we had two long conversations. in which we talked about what he always wanted to talk about, which was what was the relationship between his giving the Pentagon Papers to the Times and the ending of the Vietnam War.
Right. And so how long ago was your most recent conversation? It's June 17th, 18th today.
It's about a month or 6 weeks
Ago.
Shortly after that, I got the message that he was no longer going to be speaking.
So you knew him for decades, and I'm just wondering what you think history should remember him for. Obviously, he's most prominent for releasing the Pentagon Papers, but how would you say if you were, giving a talk about his life and his American history, how would you say he should be remembered?
Well, I think for the release of the Pentagon Papers, even though they did not have the direct impact that many people still think they had, and that the obituaries have suggested they had, I think the connection to ending the war was much more attenuated. Ellsberg believed that as well. But he was, I think, for many people, a hero and a role model. And many of the whistleblowers that have come after him have said that they were inspired by Ellsberg. He also helped them, gave them advice and public support. But I think he also should be remembered for his contribution on nuclear war, in which he passionately warned us that nuclear winter was a real thing, that if nuclear weapons exploded in any significant numbers, it might well be the end of our planet. And he passionately was committed to trying to do something about that.
Awesome. Okay. Anything else you want to say about him?
Just that he was a good friend and cared about people and cared and was very humbled by other people who risked their freedom to protest the Vietnam War, to refused to go on the draft. And he always was very much in awe of people who made that kind of sacrifice.
All right, Dad, thank you for sharing your recollections about your friend Dan Ellsberg and giving us a little bit of American history. And happy Father's Day to you.
And happy Father's Day to you. Thanks for giving me the opportunity.
All right, happy Father's Day, everyone.